What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And if everything is going according to plan, then this episode is going out right in the middle of the Easter holidays. And I am away and the automation is taking care of this upload. Now, fingers crossed it all works out. But that term automation is applicable today because my guest this week is somebody who uses quite a bit of automation and creativity in her workflows. And yes, it's another guest from Canada. We had Jason on just 2 weeks ago. And obviously with all the talk about tariffs coming out of the US at the moment like that, we are loving Canada these days. Now, my guest this week is coming from the other side of Canada, the Toronto area. And she's going to explain to us how she went from being a completely overworked and burnt out real estate agent. One stage, she was actually, she explained that the phone, when it went off, would actually send her into tears. She was so burnt out. And to go from that to completely redesigning her life around the lifestyle that she wanted. And today, I was really interested to find out about this. She lives now full-time in the very warm and sunny Bahamas. Very jealous. And how did she do it? Well, I will allow her to explain that in her own words. So without further ado, my conversation with Jess Lenouvel. Jess Lenouvel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jess, it's funny, we were just talking offline there for a minute and I said, whereabouts in Toronto are you? And you very quickly corrected me that you're not in
Not
Toronto.
anymore.
Not anymore. And you're in a slightly more exotic place. Tell us about where you're at right now.
Yeah, so I live on a small island in the Bahamas. It's called Eleuthera. And we've been here for about 4 years. There's, kind of year-round tropical situation.
What's the temperature right now?
I would say it's probably 85.
So that's probably in Celsius terms, probably up around kind of the 30s
27?
or something like that. 27? Oh, nice. Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely perfect. Well, look, you've just made us all jealous, and half the audience have switched off. Tell us. Let's turn back the clock a little bit before we go into the lovely climate you're currently living in. Let's go back to the beginning because
Sure.
I know it wasn't a straight path for you. I've read some of your backstory. Mm-hmm. You started back in Toronto, and you started out as a real estate agent.
Yep, I started as a real estate agent in 2005.
And what brought you into real estate agency out of curiosity?
So I, like so many people, went to university, got a completely useless degree, and came out of school. My mom had been a real estate agent at that point for about 20 years. And my dad's a doctor, so my dad was just horrified with every decision I'd made up until that point. And they just said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do now? And my mom just sort of gently said, why don't you get your real estate license, and you can see. She said, I think you'll be good at it, but just get your license and see how you do. So I did, and honestly, I didn't realize how much I already knew from just growing up in the industry. So I feel like because I had her and I'd been dragged around in the car for 20 years, that I had a baseline understanding that everyone else that was getting their license at the same time as me didn't have. I just sort of fell into it. And I sold real estate actively for about 15 years before I transitioned out into building a training company.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in the real estate industry as well because my father and grandfather were house builders, and so they used to do all that kind of stuff. And so I can relate to when you say you've been dragged around, because I was in building sites as a child and watching the guys erecting the scaffolding. And of course, as soon as my dad's back was turned, I'd be climbing up the scaffolding and stuff like that, The one of the great things about that is you're familiar with it, but one of the downsides to it, I suppose, I'm just thinking out loud here, is that you get a lot of the systems that would have worked from your mom being passed on to you and not necessarily working in this environment any longer. And so you're kind of like, why isn't this working? Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, when I started, in 2005, Facebook was a year old. So Facebook was launched in February of 2004. And I went to a training brokerage that, you know, taught cold calling and door knocking and flyers and billboards and, you know, geo farming and all of those things. And I was 21 and extremely introverted. And everything that they told me was, you've got to work your sphere, you've got to work your sphere, use your network. And I was like, I'm 21 years old. Like, my network isn't buying and selling property right now. And I remember thinking, all of this stuff that I'm being taught is broken. And I think that, you know, in 2005, like that's 20 years ago, but in 2005, even then I was aware that it was broken, and it's still being taught today. And so I started playing on this platform that was Facebook. And I actually built my business on Facebook. I started building relationships. I started having direct message conversations. And I just started kind of building up my client base there. My entire real estate business in the beginning was built on Facebook. And then the first year that I hit seven figures was the year that I actually started running paid traffic. So the marketing side of it was always something that I understood and that I could scale and that I knew. And I think it was more of a natural thing rather than anything else. I was just a good marketer naturally. And I think part of it came from being introverted and being motivated to not have to have 1,000 conversations a day. Yeah. But I became very aware very quickly that I needed the systems and I needed a team and I needed to be able to actually leverage. I needed to create leverage. Otherwise, I myself was going to burn out very quickly. And I did. The first time, you know, I met my husband, we really started to scale our ads. We did, the first time we hit seven figures, we did it in 6 months. And it was incredibly busy and I was incredibly burnt out. And, you know, my phone would ring and I would cry. And really? So, I would hand my phone to my husband in tears and just say, I need you to take a message. I can't talk to another person today. And so, can
you just take because a lot of people that are not real estate agents will not kind of resonate with that. Cause describe what it's like as a real estate agent at that time. Like, what was the typical number of phone calls that you'd be taking from clients?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, we were running paid traffic to about 40 landing pages, and all of them had my phone number on them. So I would say my phone was ringing every 7 to 8 minutes.
Wow. And then you're having a conversation every 7 to 8 minutes that goes on for.
And then I'm missing calls also, and then having to call people back. And it was a lot. It was a lot. And, I think that energetically, I was just I'm not built for that. I'm not one of those people who can just turn it on and be on for 24 hours a day. And so I was feeling really drained, really burnt out, just really emotionally. At the time, I was quite young at the time, and I hadn't really built up the skill of detachment. So every phone call that I got, I was being pulled into this emotional roller coaster of what this person was talking about. Every deal that I was doing was this huge emotional toll on me. And I hadn't yet learned how to kind of protect my energy. So I was taking on everyone else's stuff at the same time. So I think that it just got to a point where it was too much too fast. And so I read a book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which sounded absolutely impossible to me at the time, but I read The 4-Hour Workweek twice, and then I started realizing I needed to eliminate, automate, delegate. And so that was kind of the beginning.
It's so interesting that you say that, because there's a pivotal moment in my life, and I put it down to The 4-Hour Workweek.
It's a fantastic, everyone should read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Tim Ferriss at the time was only in his 20s or whatever. And I can remember reading this. I think he's like 10 years younger than me. And I remember reading this and just going, holy shit, how's this guy figured this stuff out?
He figured it out.
Yeah. And it's just like, this is insane. Like, and the thing is, and I could relate to his story of making hundreds of thousands selling his supplements, but being so burnt out that you were just like, what's the point of success if you're so burnt out that there's nothing to enjoy, do you know? And it sounds like you hit seven figures.
That's exactly the place that I was at.
Because like
everyone in my brokerage, everyone in my life was like, she's so successful. She's killing it. Like, do what she's doing. And in my head, I'm thinking, don't do any of this. This is terrible.
Yeah. Don't do what I'm doing. Yeah, something's wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can remember, just to give you a little insight from me, I remember 2006 or 2007. I can't remember exactly, but it was before the crash, and I was trying to complete on this huge deal. It was like 40 million sort of deal. And I can remember it was my birthday, and my mother and my brother and my sister had travelled. I was living in the south of Spain at the time, and they'd all travelled down to Spain to spend time on my birthday. And I was sitting on the laptop doing email while they were all outside having a glass of wine and basically celebrating my birthday. And I was just so absolutely flat out with work that I just couldn't enjoy it. And I remember feeling like, what on earth have I built myself? It's like a prison. Do you know what I mean?
We call it your golden cage, right? And I have a moment like that too. I call it my spaghetti incident. And I start the first chapter of my book is like essentially walking through the spaghetti incident. And it's my husband and I sitting in a restaurant having date night, talking about our future and everything that we want to do together, talking about moving to the Bahamas, talking about, everything that we want to do. And I, without even really thinking, it was almost like it was innate. My phone rang, I picked it up, I spit the spaghetti from my mouth into a napkin, stood up and walked away from the table in the middle of the conversation. And when I came back and I saw his face, I thought, I've screwed this up.
Yeah, date night will never be the same after that.
Right.
And so that was your moment of, is that like this kind of watershed moment when you suddenly went, I'm changing, I'm doing something about this today?
Yeah. I'm going to lose this person who is literally like the reason why I do all of this anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate. And tell us, so what was the very next thing that you did that kind of changed the course of your direction?
The first thing that I did was hire. I hired someone who could lighten the load. Now, if I was going to do it again, I probably wouldn't have done it exactly the same way. The technology that I was working with at the time isn't what we have today. So if I was doing it again, I think the more efficient way of doing it would have been I would have created the systems and the automation first. But at the time, even if I'd found someone to build that with, I didn't have the bandwidth. I'd gotten to a point that it was so bad that I didn't even have the bandwidth to do that. So I brought someone on to kind of lighten the sales load. And then from there, the systems got built. And we never scaled to a big team. That was never my goal. I never thought it was great for the consumer. So we kept it small and lean, but really, really efficient. And I started traveling. And I started going away, 4 or 5 days a month. And my husband and I started kind of exploring. And very quickly, we started to realize that we weren't going to stay in Toronto for very
much longer. And
I think,
tell us,
exactly.
I mean, in terms of you say that you would have done it slightly different. So tell us, like, now with the technology we have today, what would you do today in the exact same moment?
I would have automated as much of the back end as I possibly could have. At the time, we were still manually doing paperwork. We were still getting things signed. We were still submitting paperwork, and so that we could get paid, right? All of the follow-up was still manual. I was making hours and hours and hours of phone calls. So I would have brought on a system that could have done a lot of that. And this is honestly, it's what we build for agents today. Right. And so a lot of what we build and what we have built is the full back-end automation for real estate businesses, because it buys back, several hours a day of your life. and $20 an hour tasks that I would say most real estate agents are still doing, because or they're paying someone $20 an hour to do. So from a financial standpoint, I would have been more efficient about it. But first of all, at that point, I'd never built a system, or I'd never built automation before, and I'd waited until I was honestly just too desperate.
Yeah. It's I suppose you could start from the very beginning with the kind of plan in place. I suppose
exactly.
If you could.
I wasn't, and I say this to my clients all the time. I wasn't set up for the marketing to work.
Yeah, I get you. And tell us about the marketing side of things, because it's something like I put my face is on a lot of social media nowadays and things like that, and you get used to it and it becomes kind of like second nature. But for most of the people I speak to, it's kind of like, how do you do that? Like, and they don't realize it was not natural. Like it was like,
no,
you start
none
out,
of us.
and you said you were super introverted as well. Yeah.
None of us. So when I first started recording videos, I would go on the roof of the building that I was living on, and I would record them on the roof so that nobody could see me, and so that my husband couldn't find me. And if he came on the roof to check on me, to be like, has she blown off the roof? I would yell at him and tell him to go away. I was really uncomfortable in the beginning. But I think that everything that we do is like that. You know, the first sales calls that I ever did on the phone, I was uncomfortable. The first videos that I recorded, I was uncomfortable. The first time I spoke on stage, I was uncomfortable. The first podcast that I ever did, you know, I was probably soaked through, you know, and I think that a lot of this just really comes down to, you've just got to kind of elevate what your normal means. The way that I look at it is, if I can create one video and I can reach 10,000 people, that's 10,000 people that I don't have to talk to one-on-one. Like, from a leverage standpoint, my energy is being used so much more efficiently. So like, that's my preference, is that I'm going to create content and I'm going to be able to essentially grow my business creating content for 2 hours a week, as opposed to having to manually talk to people 15 hours a day.
Yeah, I can relate to that completely. And it's like, at the end of the day, people are much more comfortable buying from somebody they know, like, and trust. And if you're there putting out hours and hours of content, then the guys are sitting there, they're absorbing this, and they feel like they might never have met you. But I've had guys coming up to me in the hardware store saying, "Oh my God, Gavin,
you don't know me, but I feel like I know you." Yeah, exactly.
And it's a weird moment, but it's fun. Like, I get a lot of kicks out of it. But it is strange at first, because they really feel like that they're like a pal of yours, and you've never seen this person before in your life. But
honestly, like, that didn't exist before social media. Like, that wasn't something that anybody. You can't accomplish that with a billboard.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you know, it's funny, I had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with another Canadian who actually had a very smart way of marketing and innovating in the mortgage industry. Okay. And so it seems, you know, you guys, you're kind of like, I'm going to actually, when these podcasts go out, I'm going to put you guys together as a kind of a set, because two Canadians that are really smashing it in the kind of industry. And it's all down to using technology and marketing, and that's a big thing. I was thinking about, in terms of the 7-figure scaling that you've done, like, what are the most important things, you know, off the top of your head, would you say, to take care of?
So, I mean, I think it's difficult, because different people have different end games. And the way that I've always done everything, so the book that I wrote is called More Money, Less Hustle, because I really think that, like, anybody can get to 7 figures and work yourself to the bone, but that's not ultimately, I think, what most people want. So I'll just give examples. Like, in our programs, we have people who want to exit in 3 years. We have people who want to just be the dancing bear of the business. We have other people who, you know, truly want to be operations in the business. And so, you know, the build to each of those end results is different.
It's quite different. Yeah.
It's very, exactly. So I'm a really big believer in reverse engineering the outcome. I think that so many people in business and so many people just sort of take what we were talking about before we started recording, was take these tiny steps forward, and then they end up 5 years down the road with a business that they didn't actually ultimately want. Yeah. And so a lot of what we do when we first start working with someone is figuring out, like, what does that ideal end result look like for you? And then how do we reverse engineer that outcome and essentially collapse time? How do we make this happen faster, but in a way that we're building towards that ultimate outcome, and we're not building towards something that you're not going to want? So there's a million different ways to hit 7 figures, but I think that for a lot of people, they kind of go about it sometimes backwards. And whenever I'm on stage, I ask the audience, if I dropped 100 clients on your head right now, what would happen? And a lot of them will say, I would die. And I'm like, okay, well, great. So you're not set up for your marketing to work. And I have been there. I made the same mistake, which is why I'm asking the question, right? you're not set up for the marketing to work. So you will self-sabotage the marketing, because if it works, you already feel like you're busy. But in your head, you've been trained to think, I need more leads, I need more clients, I need more money, when ultimately you actually need more systems before you can have more clients, more leads, more money.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And how much of this, like when it comes to content, putting it out there and all that, like the algorithm has a lot to do with it. How do how do you crack the algorithm? Are there any tricks that you've figured out in your path?
I mean, as unsexy as it sounds, you just have to create better content. I think that so many people are so, they're so, in 2025, the only thing that matters is watch time, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many likes and comments and all. I know people who are making $1 billion from different social media campaigns, and their stuff doesn't get a lot of engagement, but they get really great watch time. And so I think that a lot of the time we get focused on the wrong things. We get focused on the likes and the comments and the number of followers that we have. I know people who have 7-figure real estate businesses and have like 1,200 followers, right? You don't need a massive audience. And I think a lot of the time too, people make the mistake of thinking that they need the audience before they create the content, but the audience comes from from good content. So, I also think that there's a basic understanding of human psychology that is missing from a lot of marketing. And so understanding what does the journey from stranger to client actually look like, and how can you facilitate that through short form marketing. And so, yes, there's going to be, there's tips and tricks, but I think ultimately is your hook really great? Is the content really valuable? Are people watching it through? Are people sending it to people? That's really all you can really focus on from a business standpoint, right? And I think a lot of people also make the mistake of trying to be influencers instead of understanding that they're a business. And business content and the way you grow a business account on a social media platform is different than the way that an influencer would grow an audience. And so, I think that it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more sharing of audience between platforms. Like everything that we do leads back to an email list, because email is the only asset, the only audience that you own.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
And it's funny, when I was speaking to this other Canadian chap that I mentioned, Jason is his name. He had some interesting tricks for building the email list.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing? Like, what's the most effective way to grow an email list?
So I mean, for us, it's high value promises from content, right? And I think that when we build mini funnels organically through different people's personal Facebook accounts, through their Instagram accounts. I'm not a big believer in a business page unless you're running a lot of paid traffic, especially for real estate agents. Real estate agents have been taught forever to invite every single human on the planet to like your business page. And the reality is that the organic reach of a business page is so low that you're essentially just going to spin your wheels. So what we really do is we try to build communities. We try to build that know, like, and trust through, we use three main buckets of content. We use personal content, authority content, and social proof. Now, real estate agents traditionally are some of the worst content creators out there. They use their social media platforms like billboards, right? It's just listed, just sold content. It's pictures of staircases. It's really ineffective content. And so it's actually a lot in 2025. I don't know what it's going to look like in 2027. Hopefully it looks completely different. But in 2025, it's actually, as an agent, it's really easy to stand out because the rest of the industry is so bad at this that if you just create decent content, you take people through some sort of a psychological journey, you're going to capture those people. Now, from an email list building standpoint, the easiest way is always going to be through paid traffic, always, right? But if we're talking about organic, then having call to actions in your cover photos, right? Like we will have, it's the biggest piece of real estate that people have on a platform, and yet people have pictures of their dogs or pictures of sunsets. And so, a lot of the time when we're building a cover photo, it'll have a niche, a value proposition statement, everything that we need in there, and then, click to download my free upsizing guide, or, here's an asset or a video or a training of something that is going to be highly valuable to the niche. And then from there, we collect emails. We collect, and the other thing too, I think is, there's some old school marketing that's still very prevalent where people think that they want first names and last names and emails and phone numbers and like name of your firstborn child. And like, you don't need all of that information. And every single time you have somebody, you ask for one more thing, your conversion rate's going to drop. And so
right.
I
first
think
name
that
and email. Yeah.
First name and email, that's all you need. And so with that too, I think it's not only the growth of the email list that matters, but also the retention. And I think that, the old school real estate agent newsletters that everyone is still doing is creating a lot of unsubscribes. And so if you can get people super engaged in your content through social media, the same system, the same psychology is exactly what needs to go out in your email. Right? You need to take people through the same psychological journey. You have to assume that those people are not following you on other platforms. And so you almost have to treat your email as a full psychological journey in and of itself, because you want to have more people. You want to have more people subscribe to your email list than you have in combined social media followers everywhere else.
That's an interesting metric, actually, because I look at my email list is tiny compared to my social media.
Okay.
And so when you say that, I kind of think to myself, I'm definitely doing something wrong. So that's something I'll have to get to work on.
You just need to start leading people to the email list. And it can be done quickly. It doesn't have to take a million years. But I've always, the whole TikTok saga with the States just made it even more clear that there were a lot of people who built entire businesses off of that TikTok platform that were panicked. Yeah. And so you need just like that. You need to capture those people somewhere that isn't volatile.
And it's the same. I mean, I've heard the same complaint about Facebook and YouTube and these things where you're an influencer, you're getting loads of views and stuff, and then all of a sudden they decide to tweak the algorithm, and next minute your views go to zero, and you're like, I've lost my entire audience just because of some small tweak. Yep. And there's no way of getting it back except maybe pay for the traffic or something like that.
Right. And the way that I've always also explained it to people is, the way that the algorithm traditionally works is that your content goes out to 10% of your audience. And if 10% of your audience is watching enough of it, it goes out to another 10%. And so, the average person with decent content is probably only getting, 20, 30% maybe reach on their content that they're putting out. It's not hard to have a 40 to 50% open rate on your emails. So not only are you getting more eyeballs and more attention and more reach through your email list than any other social media platform, you also own it.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, absolutely. Jess, tell us about your move to the Bahamas. So,
Sure.
What was that? What was that like? I'm just curious. I mean, Toronto this time of the year is pretty cold.
It's pretty terrible, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's probably about the same as what I'm looking out the window, and it's grey and it's dark and there's rain, and I'm just thinking to myself, there's about
a foot and a half of snow on the ground in Toronto right now. I mean, for us, I think COVID really helped.
Made it possible.
Just not even possible, just helped us move a little bit more quickly. So here's a story of changing directions. We had bought what we thought was the dream house in Toronto, and we were doing a full gut on it. It was indoor pool and all the things. My husband kept trying to figure out where we were going to put the palm trees in the house. So he was like, how many palm trees can we fit in the pool area? And I was like, I feel like we're doing this wrong. I feel
Let's
like
go to where they grow naturally.
I feel like we're trying to make this something it's not. And so, I would say 3/4 of the way through $1 million renovation, we were like, okay, well, let's go.
Let's just ditch it all.
Yeah, we were just like, well, we don't actually need to be here. And I had a conversation with one of my best girlfriends about taxes, and Canadian taxes are high, and I sat down with my husband one day. I'm the quick start of the two of us. He's always
Dan Sullivan.
He's 10 minutes behind, right? And so I sat him down and I was like, so I know that we've like thought about it and watched YouTube videos, and we've thought about Thailand, and we've thought about Spain, and we've talked. And I was like, well, I want to talk about the Bahamas. And he was like, okay. And I said, so the Bahamas is only really 2.5 hours from our parents. He's like, yeah. And I said, and you know, tropical, and you know, the weather that you love. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, and there's no income tax and no corporate tax. And he went, huh?
Sign me up.
And you could just see the wheels turning. And I was like, and you know, for me, one of the things that I really wanted is I wanted shallow water. I wanted to feel like I was being pulled into the ocean every day, and I like dark, scary ocean water was not what I wanted. So there was a lot of places, even in the Caribbean, that I was like, nope, like I want to be able to see my feet. So the Bahamas filled all the criteria, and we came down here. So we narrowed it down to 2 islands. We came down here to look at a house to rent, and we saw the house. We loved it. The real estate agent called us 10 minutes later and said, just kidding, they don't want to rent it. They want to sell it. And I said, okay, what do they want for it? And my husband was in the background going, absolutely not, absolutely not. And I was like, just hang on.
Yep.
And she said, you know, here's what they want for it. And I said, give me 10 minutes. And I hung up the phone and I sat him down for 10 minutes. And 10 minutes later, we bought that house.
Wow, nice. And tell me this, like the transition up to that point, did you already have your training business in place at that
Yes.
stage? And,
Yes.
and so you had the financial resources coming in from the business, and you were like, what is the geographic spread of your client base, we'll say? Is it
I mean, it's pretty wide. I would say Canada, the US, Australia, and I would say we have some Europe. But we've never actually run paid traffic in Europe. So anybody who has found us or who has like joined our programs from Europe has been through like just organic means. But I would say like the majority of our client base is Canada and the US, which is why like Thailand and Bali didn't work well, because the time zones would have just been wild
impossible
for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so the move then, I mean, like obviously COVID, prior to that, were you doing a lot of in-person events, or were you doing a lot of...
None.
So you were set up for immediately going remote.
And we did it on purpose. Like you know how I said reverse engineer? We did it on purpose. We knew that this was always the goal, was to be location independent and be able to like be somewhere else. So we had, you know, the stupidest thing I ever did was not invest in Zoom, like in 2018. But yeah, everything was being run on Zoom. Everything was being run, you know, digitally. I did my very first in-person event in March 4th, 5th, and 6th of 2020.
Oh, wow.
Just before. And then we didn't do another live event. We do like 3 or 4 live events a year now. But we didn't do another live event for years.
It's interesting you say that. You know, I did my first speaking gig in London on the 10th of March 2020.
Just squeezed it in.
And like literally a week later, they made this announcement that we were shutting down and all this kind of stuff. So it's super interesting, the timing. And then I started my podcast like soon after that. And it was kind of an experiment, because, you know, like I'm locked at home. What am I going to do?
What else am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And that's super interesting. And I've obviously, like, as well as that, what's great about being in somewhere inspiring like the Bahamas is that it's aspirational. So for an awful lot of your clientele, I imagine they see that as the kind of, you know, the pedestal that you can achieve if you...
Some people do. I mean, I think some people do. I do. I certainly sell more VIP in-person packages than I would have in Toronto. But yeah, I mean, some people do. And I think that there's a mindset block for a lot of people, where they think that, you know, maybe in another lifetime, or, you know, if my life was a little different, or if, you know, my husband and I don't have kids, but we have a huge group of friends here who all have kids and are all raising their kids here. And I think there's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, you know, if it wasn't for my kids, and it's like, don't let your kids be the reason why you don't do the things that you ultimately want to do. You know, there's a million different ways that kids can grow up. I think people make excuses. and they think, that
It's
it
inertia.
feels very risky. Yeah.
Yeah, it is inertia. And I mean, I think the mindset aspect that you're talking about there is absolutely crucial because, and as you know, this podcast focuses a lot on the mindset. You mentioned earlier I think it was before we started recording, you were saying that a lot of people think that success should take years and years to achieve when
it doesn't have to.
It doesn't. And the thing is if you believe that, then you set yourself up for it to take years and years, as opposed to putting the systems in place that makes it possible to do it in a much shorter period of time.
I have a way that I talk to people about certain things, and people will say, oh, I want this. And I said, great, are you willing to sacrifice for 3 years to get that? Yeah. And if they say no, then they don't actually want that thing that badly. Because I would say for most people, they can get to where they want to go in 3 years or less. If they just are like really tunnel visioned, really focused for 3 years, it doesn't take that long to really build something something that has a lot of momentum or a lot of inertia and a lot of, and you can then you can compound interest your way to the end result. But if you are willing to like truly sacrifice for 3 years, pretty much
the heavy lifting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I read it somewhere and I wrote it down, and it's something I actually teach my own coaching clients. It's your 1,000 day commitment.
Yeah.
And if you have got, there's one thing that if you do it on a consistent daily basis for 1,000 days, it'll completely change the path of your life.
It's the same thing. We're talking the same language.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm a big fan of all this stuff, as you can probably tell. So, and tell us in terms of like the market now. This is a real estate podcast. I mean, and you're working with real estate investors and working or agents, I suppose, is your sort of area. Like, what do you say to the agents that are, with interest rates went up and all of this kind of stuff, there was definitely a shift in the kind of sentiment in the market. It wasn't all go, go, go anymore. Is that a hurdle, or do you just see that as another mindset block that people have in their mind?
I think that in any market, there's opportunity. And I also think that there are, to be very old school, it's these kind of markets that separate the men from the boys. And, in 2024, I think the statistic that came out of the States was that 74% of agents did 0 deals.
Wow, that's huge.
And it's huge. And I've been saying that a market like that was coming for years. And I actually think it's a good thing, because it will get the people who really aren't in it to win it out. And it'll allow the people who are running real businesses and that have real focus and who are willing to do the things that they need to do to be successful to grab up more of that market share. But I also know people in 2024 that absolutely killed it, and you can tell by having one conversation with each side why they did. Yeah. Right. And I think that so much of it just comes down to how they see the market, how they see their business, how they see the world. There's a lot of people in that 74% that feel like they're a victim of the market. And then there's also a lot of people who feel like, oh my gosh, if everyone else is going to wait and sit on their hands, imagine how much I can grab up in this short period of time. And I think that's the biggest difference between the two camps.
Yeah, it's so true. It's interesting. It's just, I think it all boils down to, first of all, your tenacity and your resilience and just being able to kind of push through.
And resourcefulness.
Yes. Ultimately, resourcefulness is everything, because a lot of people, I know from my own experience getting hit by a train in 2008, and you crash and burn financially and stuff like that. Yeah. And for quite a while, I sat there licking my wounds thinking I've lost everything. But then after a while, you're going to go, hold on a second. I've lost maybe the financial resources, but I haven't lost the skills and knowledge. I haven't lost
the knowledge, the audience, if you've been building an audience, right? Like all of those things contribute to being able to rebuild faster.
Exactly. And the thing is you're coming back smarter, wiser as well. Exactly. And so there's a lot to be said for it. So interesting. And so, Jess, tell us about your book, so in a little bit more detail, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote that book in, I'm going to lie if I give you a year, because I'm not 100% sure. I feel like the last couple of years are a blur. It's called More Money, Less Hustle, Becoming the Seven-Figure Real Estate Agent. And it's basically broken down, like chapter-wise, into the 7 pillars to 7 figures. Okay. It goes through each pillar in terms of the way that I think about it and how to kind of maximize that pillar to get to 7 figures faster. Now, this is definitely not like an old school hustle grind. If you want it hard enough, sacrifice your whole life. It's not that kind of a book. It's very much geared around efficiency and maximizing your output and things like that. There is a whole chapter on vision, and it's actually the last chapter for a reason. And being able to, it talks about how to reverse engineer the outcomes that you actually want. It's an easy read. I didn't want to write a book that felt like a science textbook.
Yeah.
But it's done quite well. People really love it. And I think that it has the ability to really change the way that people think about business in general. There's a lot of people who've read it who aren't in real estate, but I wrote it for essentially myself in 2000.
When you were starting out.
Exactly.
And on that topic, like, what's the best advice that you would give to somebody starting that journey today?
Mm-hmm. So there's a quote that I really love. It's from my friend Alex Moscow. And I have it on a banner, actually, that I put it in rooms when I'm speaking. And it says, results don't take time, they take courage. And I think that when you are new in business or investing or anything, there's a certain amount of courage that you need to have. And my COO of my company, her name's Carolee, she actually did a Facebook reel the other day that I thought was just so brilliant, she was talking to her kids about, her kids always say, like, I want to be brave and, I want to be courageous. And you don't get to be courageous and brave if you're not scared. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
And so I think that there's this opportunity of all of the things that you're scared of. They're just opportunities to be courageous. Yeah. And then that courage leads to results and success over time.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant quote, because ultimately courage is doing something when you're scared. It's not
exactly
not having fear, because if you have no fear, then it's not courageous.
Then you're not being courageous. You just have no fear.
It's the fact that you're scared to death of doing this, and yet you push yourself out of your comfort zone. Exactly. And you push yourself towards that. Well,
and I think that anybody who's incredibly successful has had to do that over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. Yeah, and one of the things that really I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, getting into sort of speaking publicly and things like that. And a lot of people will just tell you, like, I could never do that. And I quickly say,
I was one of those people too who thought I could never. Yeah.
That's the thing. And the first time I ever had to give a speech was actually 24 hours after I discovered I had to give a speech. And it was because I was at a wedding. And it's funny, it was some good friends of mine in the US. We were in Boston, and I was a groomsman for my good friend, and my good friend's brother was the best man, and he was a lot younger than the groom, and he basically, on the night before the wedding, he said, there's no way I'm giving a speech tomorrow. And so the groom comes to me and he says, Gavin, he's just dropped out. I need you to step up and I need you to deliver the speech tomorrow. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, the night before the wedding. And so I spent the rest of the night like writing my thoughts on a speech and stuff. And the next day, like, I can remember holding the microphone and like actually seeing it shaking it because I was trembling so much. And after I finished the speech, everyone was like cheering and clapping and stuff like that. And you feel this elation. And then you're like,
all that stress just evaporates. Yeah.
And you feel like $1 million. You're like, oh my God, I got to do that again,
It's like the best drug in the world. I totally agree.
Yeah. It's amazing. Jess, I'm conscious of time. Tell us, if somebody wanted to reach out and learn more about you and what your business does, tell us how to find you.
I think the best place to find me would be Instagram. So my Instagram handle is just my name. It's just at Jess Lenouvel. And I got lots of content on there, and there's tons of stuff in the links, and it's probably the best
I'll
place
go and
to start.
I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll connect with you in there myself
Amazing.
shortly after this call. The last question, Jess, is, now that you are at the age that you're at, what if you had an opportunity to speak to that 18-year-old Jess starting out? Like, what advice would you give now, looking back?
I think that going back, it would be that, it doesn't really matter what people think. I was very conscious of what people thought of me and if people liked me. And it was probably, it consumed a lot of 18-year-old me. I wanted people to think highly of me. And I think at 18, I was too young to understand that it wasn't going to be based on what I looked like or if I was a doormat. I think I would go back and I would say, you will earn these people's respect by being yourself and by doing big things. And they'll either like you or they don't, but not everyone will ever like you. And I think that was, I think that I was always so concerned. I would meet someone for the first time and not be worried about whether I liked them. I was always just worried that they liked me.
Yeah.
And that's something that at 40, I couldn't care less about anymore.
It is true. The older you get, the less you give two shits about what somebody thinks about you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's funny, I have 4 daughters, and so I try to get that across to them, because I do think in this world of social media and stuff that young ladies have a tough time on social media and stuff like that.
And I think that I actually am fortunate that I didn't grow up with a phone in my hand. I'm essentially the generation right before it. And I think I would have struggled.
Yeah. Like so many. Well, Jess, I really appreciate your time today. And it sounds like the weather in the Bahamas is something that I would absolutely love to be experiencing.
Well, open invite, Gavin. You come anytime.
Well, I'll come to one of your VIP in-person meetups or something
Sounds
like that. Sounds great. Jess, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jess Lenouvel. What did you take away from it? I'd love to know. Leave a message down below in the comment section, or if you're listening in, maybe just send me a DM in the Instagram. I do like the idea of moving to a warm, sunny climate. Ireland is great when the weather is good, but it can be a kind of a long and cold and wet and dank winter. So at the moment, as I'm recording this, it's a lovely sunny day and it feels great living here in that. But what we want really is, we don't have to make a decision around this stuff. We just need options. And how do you get those options? You get those by creating financial freedom, financial independence. And one of the best ways to do that is through real estate investing and creating a passive income. If you'd like to learn how to do that kind of passive income, creating a portfolio that's robust and that has the ability to stand up to shocks and things of that nature, then please do consider checking out my accelerator program, which is down below in the show notes. So guys, thanks for watching or listening, and I will see you in the next one.